likely confirmation by the full Senate, Janet Yellen will take over at the U.S. Central Bank next month, and she's expected to conduct business much like her predecessor. Although some have argued that there is some concerns after continuing Bernanke's course of action, our panelists, though, say that she is the perfect woman for the job.
I think this is wonderful. I mean, it brings a real sea change to Washington, D.C. It shows that we're open to new ideas, a new way of leadership, a new way of thinking, and I think it's positive just all the way around. I can't wait for her to be installed.
I think there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of optimism, but the problems are the same. We still have a Federal Reserve that is essentially funding a lot of the government loans that are out there, whether it's mortgages or it's treasury bills.
What we really care about is earnings, and are real companies in the market actually producing earnings and growing the way we want to, and not necessarily from Fed policy. So when you have that, the average American doesn't really care about tapering per se. What we really care about more is the economy growing? Is the economy going to grow through real new dollars and real new business and revenue?
We've now averaged 200,000 jobs being created in the economy for the last several months. We've created several million jobs over the last couple of years. Arguably, Ben Bernanke has done the right thing by dropping rates to zero. Arguably, Ben Bernanke has done the right thing by going out there and essentially pumping money into the system. Why are there still so many critics about this, though? Anjon?
I think monetary policy is one of those arguments that is one of those debates that divides. It's very complicated. It also divides many of the traditional kind of left-right political, folks on the left and the right, and it divides kind of the traditional tribes. For instance, I personally do not believe that monetary policy is all that effective under current circumstances. I think its impact in the real economy is at best very limited. I think there are some potential adverse impacts in terms of juicing asset bubbles or mini bubbles to some extent. I think the concerns of hyperinflation are ridiculous, and that comes from people who don't understand monetary policy.
But that's a good point.
Yeah.
Why haven't we seen really any inflation in the United States for the last couple of years when some would have thought, hey, wait a minute, this would have been an unintended consequence that never happened?
Well, the folks who made those arguments have been making them for 5 years, and they do not understand the basics of how monetary policy, and especially quantitative easing, works. All quantitative easing does is it takes treasuries out and replaces them with reserves. There is no net change in financial assets in the private economy with any type of monetary policy, both traditional or unorthodox. So what do we have? We have a ton of reserves sitting on the balance sheets of banks, but there's very little change in the real economy due to quantitative easing. So I think the debates on tapering are a bit overdone. But I will say another thing about Janet Yellen. I think where Janet Yellen could be a real kind of long-term game changer is going to be her on the regulatory side. And what gets ignored was the Fed's complicity in the asset bubble from 2000 to 2008 on the regulatory side, where you had really a hands-off approach from Greenspan and later Bernanke, and then he recanted a bit, and both have recanted. And I think Yellen's going to be a much tougher regulator and going to use regulatory policy as a tool to manage Wall Street and asset bubbles in the banking system. And there I think she's a game changer. As far as tapering goes, again, I think it could have some impact on our asset markets. I think the impact in the real economy is going to be limited at best. Perhaps what I think we will see with Yellen that we might not have seen with Summers or somebody else is kind of what they call long-term forward guidance, that she's going to commit in the long term to keep interest rates at zero for the foreseeable future until the unemployment numbers and the broader economic numbers are much, much better. I think you'll see a lot of that with her.
One of the pleasant surprises in the economy for 2013 has been really the strength of the consumer. They've continued to hang in there despite the sequestration, despite the uncertainty, whereas companies have been much more vocal about saying, well, we're going to wait on hiring because of this, or we're going to wait because of that. And there's plenty of excuses to not spend money on capital expenditures. But the consumers are still using their credit cards. Yeah. Are consumers in the United States, are they healthier today than they were, say, a couple years ago? Jennifer?
They are a little stronger. They are. The people that still have their jobs, they've been in them for a long period of time. They've been saving their money. They have been hearing what personal finance experts like myself have been saying: continue to save, continue to think about retirement, lower debt. So when they're out there spending, I see a lot more debit card usage now. They're actually using their money as opposed to trying to put everything on credit cards. I hear people asking me, what about this interest rate? Is this a great interest rate? They're more aware than they were 2 years ago, and that is to their credit.
Thank you to our panelists from the center. That was expert financial columnist Jennifer Streaks and management consulting analyst Anjon Roy. and also accountant and author Ebong Eka.